Welcome to Horror Sector, where the shadows whisper secrets and the dead refuse to stay silent. Tonight, I'm bringing you 5 spine-chilling encounters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the afterlife. From haunted nursing homes where ghostly nurses claim their victims, to possessed dolls that walk and talk in the dead of night. These aren't just stories. These are real experiences from real people who've brushed against the supernatural. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and ask yourself, are you brave enough to enter the horror sector? Let's find out. My name is Jesus. I'm 50 years old, and I want to tell you a story. 7 years ago, we placed my father in a nursing home after my mother died. It was a difficult but necessary decision. He agreed to it. His body no longer responded as it once did, and with my job and responsibilities, I couldn't care for him as he deserved. At first, my father was unhappy, which I understood. It wasn't easy to adapt to a new place. He was surrounded by strangers and had a set schedule, but over time he got used to it and made friends among the residents, and at least on the surface, he seemed at peace. However, something began to worry me after a while, because every time I visited him, I noticed he was talking about strange things. At first I thought it was just his old age, his delusions, but he wasn't like that. His insistence also made me doubt him. He was always telling me to get him out of there, because one afternoon he said to me in a trembling, fearful voice, "She's coming for us." I asked him to explain because I wasn't understanding anything, and then he started telling me about a ghost nurse. "Everyone here has seen her, son. She's tall, thin, too thin. Her skin is white. It seems like the light passes right through it. She wears a uniform with a skirt down to her knees, like the nurses of old. But the worst part is that she doesn't walk. She doesn't have legs. She's just a walking torso. Others say she has legs, but that she doesn't walk, that she just floats." Hearing this, I shuddered, not because of the story itself, but because of the way my father told it. His eyes reflected terror. "Dad, have you seen her? Those are just rumors. Ghosts don't exist." However, he shook his head and told me that every time someone sees her, they tell someone and die days later. Exactly 2 days later. I sighed, thinking it was just a lie and that he just wanted to go home alone. But that was a bad idea. Here they fed him, took care of him, kept an eye on him, so I didn't take him out. I asked the nurses about this, and they all acknowledged the myth. They said it was just because a person's imagination, that I shouldn't worry, that it was just a way for the elderly to express their fear of death. At first, I thought the same, a simple metaphor. But what came next made me doubt. My father was in the nursing home for a year. During that time, many elderly people died, always seeing that ghostly nurse. But this didn't affect me. It's always normal in these places for elderly people to be a little sick. However, my father insisted that before they died, they all said they had seen that nurse. Once, while I was visiting him, we started talking and eating. And while we were eating, he told me something that made my blood boil. Last night I saw her. Jesus, what are you talking about, Dad? The nurse. I woke up around 2 a.m. for no reason. And that's when I saw her. She came through the door. She had legs, but her ankles and feet were gone. She floated toward me, and when she got close, she said, "It's your turn." The fear on her face was genuine. For the first time I saw my father completely terrified. I hesitated. I didn't want him to be unhappy in this place. So I completed the paperwork and got them out of the nursing home. Not because of that nursing home cursed, but because I wanted them to be happy. But listen, 2 days later my father passed away. Since then, I've wondered, was it just a coincidence, or was that legend really true? What do you think? You believe in the supernatural? I didn't until it happened to me. I'm a nurse at a nursing home. At that time, I had been working the night shift there for 3 years, taking care of the elderly residents. Over those years, I'd seen many elderly people come and go, some recovering, others saying their final goodbyes. But of all of them, there was one who touched me deeply. Marisol. Marisol was a sweet, wise, and peaceful old woman. Unlike the other residents, she never complained, never demanded more than necessary, and always had a word of encouragement or timely advice. When I was sad or worried, she always listened and gave me the best advice I'd ever heard, and over time, we became friends. "You have a good heart, son, but you must learn not to carry the pain of others," she would always say when I helped her get comfortable in bed. I would laugh and tell her it was impossible. The truth is, it hurt me to see her becoming more frail, sicker, and more ill. Her body was weakening with each passing day, and my heart ached every time I saw her suffer. During those months, I did everything. I even used my own money for her medicine, but it seemed like I couldn't do anything. They were giving Marisol, my friend, only a few days to live. One night I arrived late to my shift. The colleague I was supposed to relieve left in a hurry without even giving me the day's updates. I started doing my job. I began checking on the patients as usual. The night passed quietly, and around 1 a.m. I went to the dining room for dinner. The other nurses were asleep, so I stayed on guard duty alone. And while I was making my tea, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Before I could even turn around, I already knew who it was. I recognized the scent of the lotion instantly. It was Marisol. I turned around with a smile, but serious, because it was already very late. And there she was, but she looked different. Now she was radiant, strong, beautiful, with a smile from ear to ear and an energy I hadn't seen in her for months. She seemed to have recovered and was happy, very happy. With a mischievous tone, I playfully scolded her, telling her she should be in bed sleeping and resting and that she couldn't be there. She smiled sweetly at me and looked at me with eyes full of life. She told me she didn't feel bad anymore, that she was very well, that she wasn't in any pain anymore, and that she was happy after several months of suffering. She also thanked me for supporting her and for the sincere friendship we had. I was surprised. The night before, I hadn't even been able to speak. I had been very ill, and now I saw her doing very well. She hugged me, and at that moment I felt something I had never experienced before. Absolute peace, immense peace, as if my problems had vanished for a moment. After the hug, she told me she had to go. She said she needed to go rest and thanked me for everything, that she loved me like a son. I told her not to leave and that I gave her permission to stay with me and have some tea with me before going to bed. I told her to wait for me, that I would get a glass. I went to get it, but when I returned, she was gone. Marisol was gone. She must have gone to her room to sleep. That's what I thought. So I went to her room to at least say goodnight, but Grandma was gone. I started looking for her all over the nursing home. I checked the bathroom, the patio, every hallway, and nothing. I spent an hour looking for her, but I couldn't find her. Desperate, I called the nursing home manager. I told him that Marisol had run away and wasn't anywhere in the nursing home. There was an awkward silence on the other end. "What are you talking about?" I repeated. Marisol had run away. The manager was silent for a moment before answering. "Oh yes, Marisol is gone because she passed away yesterday morning. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I'm sorry." When he said this, I hung up without saying anything. It couldn't be true. I had seen her just a few minutes ago. I spoke to her and even hugged her. When my colleagues woke up, I demanded that the supervisor on duty show me the security camera footage. The dining room was clearly visible on the screen, and there I was, talking but alone. There was no one in front of me, no Marisol. I was alone. Tears welled up in my eyes, and all I could think was, she came to say goodbye. I prefer to remain anonymous. I'm a nurse in a nursing home, and during my 20-year career, I've worked in various nursing homes, mostly on the night shift or 24-hour shifts. However, my first nursing home, which I'd rather not name, left me with a terrifying after effect. And although I've always enjoyed caring for the elderly, there was something about that place that never gave me peace of mind. They hired me at that nursing home without telling me a secret. It was a 2-story building, and on the second floor, there was a sealed room, a door that was always locked. No one went in, no one went out. When I first asked about it, my colleagues just shrugged. "It's best not to talk about it," they told me. The residents, on the other hand, whispered stories about that room. They said an old woman died there in a horrible way, that the nurses found her in the early morning with her eyes wide open, as if she had seen something that scared her to death. She's still there. A woman named Eloisa told me this once because at night they heard noises coming from that room. I logically thought it was the caretaker who had access to that room, because sometimes at night they heard noises inside, footsteps, banging. So I didn't pay much attention to what that old woman said about ghosts, but months later, I learned the truth about that room. That night, I started my shift as usual. It was 2 a.m., and most of the nurses were resting. I was on duty, reviewing some documents, when I suddenly heard a loud thud in the hallway. I immediately grabbed my things and went outside to investigate, thinking one of the elderly residents had fallen. The thuds were coming from the second floor, and then I realized they were coming from the sealed room. I froze. That wasn't possible. The supervisor was asleep, and no one had access because the door was locked. No one could be inside. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and climbed a little higher up the stairs. As I got closer, the air grew heavier and colder, and I began to feel afraid. When I reached the door of that room, I noticed it was shaking as if someone were banging on it from the inside, as if someone were trying to open it. I called my supervisor's name several times, but he didn't answer. I couldn't move because of fear. I couldn't breathe, and suddenly there was silence. I don't know why I did what I did, but I slowly approached and pressed my ear against the wood, and that's when I heard the whisper. "Help me." I recoiled in fright, feeling my heart about to burst from my chest. That voice wasn't human. It was raspy, cold, as if it were filtering in from another world. I ran downstairs and locked myself in the infirmary. I wanted to believe I had imagined it all. Around 3 a.m., I fell asleep in my chair, but something woke me up. I started hearing screams. They were heartbreaking, desperate. I thought it was one of my colleagues, but they came running to see me, thinking it was me. However, the screams were coming from the second floor. Some elderly people were awake, frightened. Some were talking amongst themselves, saying, "I haven't heard her in years." I forced myself to walk confidently in front of them, but inside I was trembling with fear. When only the nurses and I reached the hallway, I froze. Outside the room were some metal chairs and a desk. And the chairs were moving on their own, and the desk was dragging a little, as if someone invisible were pushing them. The caretaker told all the elderly residents on the second floor that she was going to open the door, and they all quickly hid in their rooms. We could hear some elderly women praying for us. This frightened me. The attendant put the key in the lock and turned it, slowly opening the door. When the door opened, the woman in charge screamed angrily at the dark room, yelling at it to stop. From outside, I watched as the bedsheets rose up, as if something were hidden beneath them. Every time they tried to fall to the mattress, they fell in a human shape, as if someone were inside covering themselves. My skin prickled. This was impossible. I tried to approach, but at that moment everything stopped. The caretaker sent someone to get some things and threw them into the room, all the while yelling for them to leave. I froze when I saw something I don't think anyone else saw. I slowly turned my head, searching the room, and in the darkest corner, I saw someone, an elderly woman. She stood there in the darkness. Her long hair fell across her face, an old woman who had already died. She gradually blended into the darkness and disappeared. The caretaker remained like that for a few more minutes until she closed the door. We were all speechless, especially me, since I had never witnessed anything like this. My colleagues said that many had quit because of these screams, these poltergeists, but that very few had actually seen that door opened. I didn't quit. I spent several years there, listening to cries, screams, banging, and every paranormal event you can imagine, many nights on the second floor in that room. But in all those years, that door was only opened once more. The sealed room wasn't empty, and we all knew it. This was my story, audience. Good evening. When I was a child, I remember that at family meals my grandfather would sometimes talk about the years he spent in a nursing home in the mid-90s. His stories were always the same. The days were peaceful, the meals passable, and the nurses kind. But when night came, things changed. According to him, there was something in that place, a child. Not just any child, not a visitor, not the son of a nurse. It was a ghost. Everyone had seen and heard it. Some saw it out of the corner of their eye running through the hallways. Others heard it laughing, a loud laugh that echoed through the rooms at 3 or 4 in the morning. There were those who said they felt his presence by their bedside, as if he were watching them in the dark. Others dreamed of him, and the curious thing was that they always accurately described his appearance. They all described the same thing, and this was bad for the old person. The ghost became a more serious problem because even though they said they weren't doing anything, many elderly people were dying of cardiac arrest. The staff also tried everything: masses, rosaries, cleansings, and nothing worked. My grandfather was skeptical. He thought the other old people were just being influenced by suggestion, that an elderly person's mind is fragile and prone to hallucinations. But one day he changed his mind. That morning he was asleep, and that's when he began to feel something icy on his face, a small, cold hand. He opened his eyes with a start, but there was no one there. There was nothing in front of him, only darkness. His breathing slowed. He thought it had just been a nightmare, so he simply turned toward the wall. But when he turned, there was the boy lying in the gap between the bed and the wall, staring at him. My grandfather described his skin as pale, almost grayish. His eyes were dark, enormous, wide open. He was just as everyone described him. He got out of bed, trembling uncontrollably. She barely managed to run out of her room, and from that night on, she never slept without lighting a candle beside her bed. And so, little by little, over the months and years, the nursing home became a legend in that town. The elderly continued to die. The staff was desperate, but no one could do anything, until one day the nursing home closed for good. The official reason was never revealed, but everyone suspected why. Eventually, the land was sold and built upon. Now, a store stands in its place. And the most chilling thing of all is that the current owners still hear paranormal activity. I know this because they are my neighbors. Even now, in 2025, they say that when they close late, sometimes laughter can be heard coming from the bathroom. Sometimes you can hear small footsteps running outside the store, but when they go to answer, there's no one there. Maybe they don't see apparitions anymore, but I'm sure that dead man is still wandering around. My name is Ricardo, and I worked as a security guard at a hospital for nearly 8 years. During that time, I saw many things: patients in distress, families grieving, doctors rushing to save lives. But nothing prepared me for what happened during one particular night shift in the winter of 2018. I was stationed on the 4th floor, which housed the intensive care unit and several recovery rooms. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and the hallways were empty and silent except for the occasional beeping of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses making their rounds. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the security camera feeds, when I noticed something odd on one of the screens. A man was walking down the hallway of the 5th floor. He was wearing a hospital gown and moving slowly, almost shuffling, toward the stairwell. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes patients wandered off, disoriented from medication or confused after surgery. I radioed to the nurses' station on the 5th floor to let them know about the wandering patient, but no one responded. I tried again. Still nothing. Concerned, I decided to go up there myself to help the man get back to his room. When I reached the 5th floor, the hallway was completely empty. The lights flickered slightly, and there was an unusual coldness in the air that made me shiver. I walked toward where I had seen the man on the camera, checking each room as I passed. All the patients were asleep in their beds. No one was missing. I reached the stairwell door and opened it, looking up and down the stairs. Nothing. Just concrete steps and the echo of the building settling. That's when I heard it, a voice calling from behind me. "Excuse me, can you help me find my room?" I turned around quickly, and there he was, the man from the camera. He was standing just a few feet away, his hospital gown hanging loosely on his thin frame. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes had a strange emptiness to them. But what disturbed me most was that he was dripping wet, as if he had just stepped out of a shower. Water pooled around his bare feet. "Of course, sir. What's your room number?" I asked, trying to stay calm and professional. He stared at me for a moment, his expression blank, and then he said, "I don't remember. I just woke up and I don't know where I am." I pulled out my radio to call the nurse's station again, but before I could speak, the man reached out and grabbed my wrist. His hand was ice cold, colder than anything I had ever felt. It was like touching frozen metal. I gasped and pulled away instinctively. "Sir, please, don't..." But he wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed on something behind me, something down the hallway. His mouth opened slowly, and he whispered, "She's coming. You need to leave. Now." I turned to look where he was staring, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway and the flickering lights. When I turned back to ask him what he meant, he was gone. Completely gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no door closing, nothing. Only the puddle of water where he had been standing remained. My heart was racing. I didn't understand what had just happened. I ran back to the nurse's station and found a nurse finishing up some paperwork. I asked her if any patients had been reported missing or wandering, and she shook her head. "Everyone's accounted for. Why? Did you see something?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy, but it described the man I had encountered, his appearance, the hospital gown, the wet floor. Her face went pale. She stood up slowly and walked over to a filing cabinet, pulling out an old folder. She opened it and showed me a photograph. It was him, the same man. "This patient," she said quietly, "died 3 weeks ago. He drowned in the hydrotherapy pool during a treatment session. His body was found at 2:30 in the morning." I felt my blood run cold. The time, the water. It all made sense now. But what didn't make sense was what he had said to me. "She's coming." I asked the nurse what he could have meant, but she just shook her head and told me that several staff members had reported seeing him wandering the halls ever since his death. Some said he was looking for his room. Others said he was trying to warn people. "Warn them about what?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down the hallway, her expression troubled. "There's another one," she finally said. "Another ghost, a woman. She's been seen on this floor for years, long before I started working here. They say she was a nurse who went insane and killed several patients before taking her own life. Some people believe she's still here, still looking for victims." I didn't want to believe it, but after what I'd just experienced, I couldn't deny it anymore. For the rest of my shift, I stayed at my desk, watching the cameras closely. And then, at exactly 3:15 in the morning, I saw her. On the 5th floor, walking slowly down the same hallway where I had encountered the drowned man. She was wearing an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, and her movements were stiff, unnatural. She stopped outside one of the patient rooms, turned her head toward the camera, and stared directly into it. Even through the grainy footage, I could see her face. It was twisted, angry, and her eyes were completely black. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she walked into the wall and vanished. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. Every night I worked, I felt like I was being watched. I would hear footsteps behind me when no one was there. I would see shadows moving in the corners of the hallways. And worst of all, I kept seeing that woman, sometimes on the cameras, sometimes standing at the end of a corridor. Once, I even saw her standing outside the security office staring at me through the window. The hospital is still operating today, and as far as I know, people still see them. The drowned man looking for his room, the nurse looking for her next victim. I don't know if they'll ever leave. But I do know one thing. I'll never work a night shift in a hospital again. Not ever. And there you have it. 5 terrifying tales from the horror sector archives. The question is, what would you do if you found yourself face to face with the paranormal? Would you run, or would you stand frozen in fear? These stories remind us that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones we imagine. They're the ones that actually happen. If you survived tonight's journey into darkness, show your courage by hitting that like button and subscribing to Horror Sector for more bone-chilling encounters. And tell me in the comments which story terrified you the most. Until next time, stay vigilant. The Horror Sector never sleeps.